Yeah, she did say that.
He is obsessed.
Oh, yes. Okay, we're going downstairs? Okay. I haven't been here.
You left review editorial board.
Where are you going to put people that want to listen to this talk that I'm going to give? Is it here?
It'll be upstairs. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Where shall I sit here? Oops, excuse me.
Yeah. Hello, good evening. Very glad to have with me today Seymour Hersh, one of the finest investigative journalists in the world, very well known in the United States and elsewhere for the work he has been doing now over many, many decades, charting the misdeeds of the American empire, trying to bring the truth to as large a public as possible, and someone who has not become a courtier at the White House like some others did after their initial success in bringing down Nixon. Sy Hersh has currently been under attack by people who feel that he knows too much and writes too much, but he carries on, and let's hope he carries on for a long time to come. Sy, let's start with your new book, your latest work, The Killing of Osama bin Laden. This is a story that was first published in the London Review of Books. It was not published in any mainstream American magazine or newspaper. What was it about this story that upset them so much that people who published you for decades suddenly got extremely nervous?
Well, one never knows what's in the minds of other people, so
Yeah.
I can't be definitive.
No.
It seems clear to me that stories that were eagerly accepted for criticism of Bush and Cheney, somehow there was a higher standard when a Democrat was in. That's probably inevitable because for all of his faults, there's no question that Obama is probably, this is sort of scary to say, he's probably going to be the brightest and most competent president we're going to have in the next 50 years, which is really interesting about America.
Yeah.
The future isn't so it's very grim if you look at what's going on now politically. What you said in your introduction about being courtiers is, I worked at the New York Times, which is an establishment newspaper for many years, 8 years, and I was sort of their chief investigative reporter. And what the process, it's a tough process. If you're covering an agency, you don't have much choice except to sort of be on the team. Because let's say you're covering the White House, and if you really begin to go after some of the statements they make and sort of pointing out the discrepancies between the truth and what they say politically or publicly, you lose access. I have two brothers-in-law that are public defenders. And in other words, they're lawyers for the poor or the people who can't defend themselves. And of course, their job is to be between the police state and their client. And I always like to think of myself, brushing snow from my mantle, what you will. But as somebody who's there, is just to let the White House know there's somebody there that's going to do the counter narrative. Yeah. That's so, and there's not enough of us, it seems.
And the bin Laden story was just too pat, really. When it first broke, for me, someone who knows and has written about that country, Pakistan, it was impossible, absolutely impossible that they didn't know where he was. I mean, only some idiot could believe that. And second, that it all happened without their knowledge. I mean, just take the guys living in a house a few miles from the Kakul military academy, like your West Point. No one knows he's there. I mean, no one believes it in Pakistan. No. Everyone knew if he was somewhere in the country. I mean, I remember meeting a senior intelligence official by accident on a plane who had been junior to me at school in Pakistan. And he said, I'm doing awful things now. You don't want to talk to me. And I said, like, tell me what? He said, I'm combating terrorism. So I burst out laughing. I said, I know what that means. And I said, okay, the compartment of the plane was virtually empty. It was a PIA plane. And I said to him, I just want to know, where is Sheikh Osama? He said, I don't know. I said, but he's in the country, isn't he? He said, yes. He said, even if I knew, do you think I'll tell you? I said, no, no, of course, but I just want to submit some pack. He's in the country. He said, yes. I said, how many people know where he is? So he said, so I said, let me guess, the chief of staff, the president, and the head of the ISI. He said, maybe one other, but let's forget it. I said, okay. So he's there, he's being looked after. If you're telling me this, you mean to tell me the Americans don't know? He said they know. So I said, okay, they know. But he said what they say is they want him dead, they don't want him alive. So I said, so they want you to kill him? They said, that's what they say. And I said, well, and? And he said, Tariq, do you ever kill the golden goose that lays the golden eggs?
Money. The Saudis. You know, I outsmarted myself a little bit in this story because I knew there would be a storm about it. It happened on a weekend night, and the president announced very dramatically, we've got him, we killed him, and it's very interesting. The initial reports, the initial stories that they had to walk back, where he had an AK-47 and he was defending himself. What they did is they killed a prisoner who wasn't well, and it was an execution.
Yes.
And the two senior generals, General Kiani, the head of the army, and General Pasha, the head of the intelligence service then, who were deeply involved in this, as your friend told you, or a friend indicated. I don't know how much the president knew, but that's...
Was it Musharraf?
No, it was...
it was Kiani.
It was Mrs. Bhutto's husband, that creep.
Oh, Zardari, the corrupt boy.
The 10%er.
Yeah,
Yeah, someday I'll tell you.
Yes,
about,
yes.
I'll tell you about my dinner with him one night, but it was just bizarre. But anyway, the control of the media by the White House can be, first of all, they're much more sophisticated. And this kind of event for the president, it's in late May of a year before an election. He's a Democrat under a lot of criticism with a very resistant Congress. He's an African American. He wants re-election. That's it. That's the most important priority. And this is the ticket to ride. Yeah. We killed him. The war on terror is over. America's won. We had people parading in the streets when they announced it. And then they controlled the story. The first thing they did is they were calling, the main reporters are begging for information. We want to know. So they get backgrounders from, even the president was quite involved in it, the head of his staff, his chief of staff, the head of the CIA, a man named Brennan, who, they're all part of the team. And they were giving briefings, and reporters were told to call in. The way they do it now is very sophisticated. You call to a certain number, and you're connected by phone to a whole group. And he's talking to all of you at once, and you can ask questions, but it's not really a formal news conference in the sense that you're physically there. So they're totally at their mercy. And after, they had a problem because they oversold the story about him with guns and defending himself. The worry was, as they said, they killed a prisoner of war. That's a war crime. And also, it's also true that in Pakistan, if the 24 SEALs that had gone in, two helicopters full of them, if they'd been caught, they could have been tried for murder.
Yes.
So you have that problem. So they tried to deal with it by presenting the falsehood that he was aggressive in defending himself, and that's why they had to kill him. They just killed him. It was an execution.
Yeah.
And they put the parts in the body bag, and the requirement then was there were two main things that were important. One is that you take the body out, and two, you don't announce it for a week. You announce it as he's in the Hindu Kush mountains somewhere, and you didn't even know he was there, but you did a raid with a drone attack on a house, and then you do the after-action report, and here's this tall body, you did DNA, and my God, we got him. The president would get just as much attention, maybe not quite as much, but an awful lot in terms of re-election, and you protect the Pakistani generals who hadn't told us initially. And so in this story, what happened is a walk-in comes in. We have a defector, and these are not wonderful people who betrayed the country. He was a regular army, not intelligence. He was an intelligence officer for the army who had been passed over for general, and had resigned and was doing some odd jobs He would do things for the ISI. He did some security work too in Islamabad. And he decided it was $25 million reward, standing for any information about bin Laden. He walks in to our station chief, then the CIA man, a man named Jonathan Bank, B-A-N-K, who, quite competent guy. This is in 2010, and he tells the following story. We found him. The ISA found him. They found him. They picked him up in 06, maybe 05, and they built Abbottabad, this compound for him, and they stashed him there as a prisoner. And he, by the way, had a full-time Pakistani doctor who was an expert in the kidney. He did have the kidney problems. Yeah. He wasn't on a dialysis, but he had a kidney problem. Okay, so the first thing we have is rage. Why didn't the two generals in charge that we did so much for? You want a helicopter that you could use privately? Of course. He only likes golf. You want to come to America and play golf with our famous golfer, Jack Nicklaus? We'll arrange that for you. You want this or that? You want a car? You want money that, we'll do that for you under the table. We'll give you stuff over the table. We'll take care of you. And they cut that off because they were mad. Their explanation when they began to talk to us, when the money was cut off, the two leading generals was, of course, Saudis paid an awful lot of money. Mm-hmm. At the time I did it, I knew the money, I was told, in the hundreds of millions. What I wasn't told till afterward was that what the Saudis actually also were doing were transferring ownership of tankers full of oil. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the, by the way, talk about instruments of currency. Any tanker, you load up a tanker with oil, once it's in the high sea, you can change ownership. Like that, sometimes 3 times. So they just changed, they gave it to a certain office in Pakistan, they sold it to usually to India or China, and there's another huge sum of money that we don't know much about. Why? Because obviously they didn't want us, the Saudis did not want us talking to bin Laden. In the argot of the intelligence service, the walk-in is the treasure. He's the spy, the guy who comes in from the other side, and he has other information. So we protect him. And we bring him to America. The walk-in comes in August of 2010. The raid is until 9 months. It took us 3 or 4 months to convince Pasha and Kiani to coordinate. And once they decided to, lack of money, they got us DNA. They gave us his mail. He was writing letters. And they kept it, of course. They didn't deliver it, and he was completely isolated. Okay, so I'm writing a story about this. And they know the crap is going to fly in my face on this one because the president has told a series of lies. We did kill him. The SEALs came in and killed him, but everything else, as you said, the Pakistanis, people don't do homework like they should. And they also, critical thinking is not a big thing in America. No. I was lucky. I went to the University of Chicago where they taught us you better think on your own about everything. There was no textbooks. Well, it turns out if you did the history, the Pakistanis began helping us in the war in Pakistan, and a war in Afghanistan, rather. They began helping us, pretty much in the early 80s. And if you remember, our game then was bin Laden.
Of course.
And bin Laden helped us kill the Russians.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm writing all this. And one of the things I did is, okay, Pakistan's helped us in Afghanistan. And also, of course, once we began the war in Afghanistan against the Russians, we are also facing the Indians, which, of course, India moved into Afghanistan. Any leverage they can get on the Pakistanis. The Indians get away in Kashmir, the Indians actually got away with more aggressive stuff in Kashmir than the Pakistanis did. But, so the Indians, the ISI came in and there were 8 consulates and they really destroyed them. They actually hung some Indian diplomats. And this is in early 80s.
Yes.
Before Pakistan went nuclear. They didn't go nuclear in terms of actually Kahuta, their first reactor was going in the middle 80s. They didn't get into the bombs probably until 89, 90, we're not sure.
Yeah, just as the Russian war was coming to an end.
There you go.
The US said, okay, let them have it.
So who got the bomb first? India. India had the bomb by 75. So what's the Pakistani worry? First strike. The line from Delhi to Islamabad is pretty straight. It's only an hour flight. Abbottabad's right there, about 40 kilometers outside of, in the foothills north of Islamabad. So Pakistan's in a firing line. And so they want a better radar system. So the idea that 2 choppers could go in and not be seen would suggest the radar wasn't good. So I went and looked at the radar. You can find public documents. I quit when it was $900 million we invested over 8 or 9 years in building radar. Raytheon was the main contractor. This is our aid. This is our payback to the Pakistanis. They have the bomb, you don't. You have to, you got 10 minutes the radar's got to be great. The radar turns out to be what they call 3D audible. Audible 3D means you cannot erase an image. So what does that mean? I should have gone into this more. In order not to see, they had to shut down the system.
Yes.
That's what they did.
Yeah.
That way, and you're talking about a country that has F-16s constantly on patrol like we do. They have the same problem. They have a early warning system. They always, the Indians have the same crazy
thing.
system. So you have this amazing mechanism that shut down. The only reason they must have shut it down, there must have been hell to pay on the inside, which there was. After the fact, when people learned, they have generals and admirals in charge of air defenses. Of course, they all had to be shut down. But anyway, so I think, okay, I can't name the sources. The easy way out is to say anonymous sources.
Yes.
And first of all, you can't do the story as the incident you told to your friend in the airplane. If I told you and put you on a turnstile, you wouldn't tell me who he was because you protect him. You're not. And secondly, we have a president that's been more aggressive on leaks than anybody else, putting CIA
He's locked
guys
up more whistleblowers than anyone else.
There you go. So there's a lot of reason to be anonymous, but that's the criticism you make. So what I did in this story, when I began the narrative of the walk-in, I said he walked into the station chief named Jonathan Bank. Bank was a Harvard graduate. They don't have that many in the CIA anymore. It's dumbed down like a lot of things. Yeah. So what I did is I named him. And I thought he'd gotten in trouble in a skirmish, a political skirmish with somebody in ISI, and they leaked his name to a newspaper, Urdu Press, and so we had to take him out. So I'm not breaking the law by naming him.
Yeah.
And the CIA is like any organization, there's competition, and the kingpins are the operators. And he was a number 2 in the operations. That was how competent he was. But I also knew he had a reputation for having a lot of integrity. I did let his family know what I was going to do before I did it. And so my thought was, the press I overestimated it. I thought too much of them. I thought if they could get Bank in the 2 or 3 days after my story came out, as you know, in the LRB, their computers broke. There were a million hits or some incredible number of hits. And the internet's just amazing. It doesn't matter where you publish. It just doesn't matter anymore.
It goes everywhere.
It goes everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I thought, the dog that didn't bark. Here's what I thought. Reporters would see that the one guy that could kill me would Bank. If Bank went up and said, walk-in? I don't know anything of some guy walking in. And lying about a walk-in is appropriate. I had a hunch he went. He didn't. Not a word out of him. They had some lesser people who were retired say stuff. I thought everybody would understand that if he didn't do this, I'm into something. But they did. They were just too busy going after me. What's sad about this is too often my colleagues don't think about what they're not seeing. They only want to deal with what they're being told. They were so eager to get inside information about how the president, what decision he made, and what did his wife do, and who did he talk to about this, and how many people knew about it inside, all those stories they love to tell, narratives, that they lied about bin Laden having arms, and they lied about, there was a treasure trove of documents they got. That all was written off as the fog of war. That happens, that mistakes happen. So I'm going along, and I get an email 2 days after, well, actually, the day after the event. I was just watching it like everybody else. Oh, they got bin Laden. Bin Laden had been out of business.
Yeah.
I mean,
everyone knew that.
He'd been out of business. He was gone. And after we chased him out, and they're copycats. Yeah. But Al Qaeda, that's not. There's Salafists and Wahhabis.
Yeah.
They're not Al Qaeda. We use the word Al Qaeda because the law giving that Hillary Clinton voted for, the big debate she's having with Sanders, she made the vote. 19 Democrats read the report, the internal report, and voted against the law that said, the law in 2002 authorizing Bush to plan for war in anywhere Al Qaeda was, The law said wherever Al-Qaeda is, he can take action without telling Congress. And that's why they keep this word Al-Qaeda going. I mean, what are the guys in North Africa that call themselves, they're not Al-Qaeda. He has no, you know that. It's
Yeah, of course.
But what did go on was they were, that night after the raid, they had a chopper that got blown. As you know, there were no fire department, no police.
No.
And as you also know, that one of the very good Urdu newspapers reported, the Western press came to Abbottabad, and they went to neighbors. Yeah. What do you know? No, we didn't see anything. And then a week later, an Urdu-speaking reporter went, and I write about it. And he went and he talked to everybody, and they all said, well, that night, before it got dark, we were visited by the military or the police, people were never sure, and said, you're going to hear things tonight. You do not leave your house, and you tell nobody about it. That's what he heard that from 10 different neighbors.
Yeah.
Nobody came. Actually, one of the stories we put out, if you remember, a chopper crashed, and instead of being a 20-minute murder mission, it was a 40-minute mission. They had to get a relief chopper in. And while they were waiting, of course, they had to destroy the chopper because it had avionics and communication gear. To talk back to Washington as they did the mission, they had to blow it up. It had a huge, big firestorm.
You know, Syed, the day after the event, quite an astonishing thing happened, which was quite unique. Is that a lot of the, the cabbies, the motorcycle rickshaw drivers, all were carrying banners, handwritten banners, saying, shh, don't blow your horn today, our army is sleeping.
Baby.
Amazing. Meaning,
Really?
yes.
I never heard that before.
Yeah, yeah. And they did it because everyone knew that senior ranks of the army had collaborated. I mean, people are not stupid. Even people who can't read or write knew what happened. So that is why I was surprised at the shock horror put on when your text first appeared.
My text appeared, the actual draft I did could have been published 2 years earlier.
Yeah, really, it took 2 years.
Yeah. But it didn't take 2 years. No. I made it better, but I had to just
material.
Well, what happened was, and here's what really struck me. One of the big concerns we have, our national security concerns, are the nuclear weapons in Pakistan.
Yeah.
There's a jihadist problem.
Yeah.
As you know, there in many communities when you get outside of Islamabad and Lahore, many communities are the feeling for bin Laden was high, a lot of respect.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that wasn't the overwhelming feeling, but in certain areas he was very popular. Yeah. And so what we did is the deal was, that's why we were going to pretend that it didn't happen right away. And so when Obama, and we pay a lot of attention, we see the Army as the protector not only of security for the country and sort of the father of the country, or the uncles, like in Turkey, but also the people that keep us informed about the bombs. We have teams that do nothing but worry about where the bombs are. We want to know where they are. And of course, you know and I know that there's no reason for us to believe everything we're told. And they know that we don't tell them everything about our plans to do something aggressively. The word in our community is, are there a few of the bombs hidden in the tall grass along the runway? That's the way we put it. We always worry about that, and rightly so. I know I've learned much more since I did this article because I've been in touch with dissident ISI guys, about which I don't know what the hell to do, because if I write anything too much about them, bam. You know, the ISI does not play around. It's a very tough organization, the intelligence service. So what happened that night is we learned at 8:30 that night, there was the White House announced dramatically there's going to be a very important announcement. And everybody said, oh my God, what is it? And some of the thought was maybe bin Laden was so big, the president was demanding network time. And they asked for time at about 8 o'clock, they asked for time in 30 minutes, and they delayed and they delayed. Finally, it wasn't until 11 o'clock, almost 11 o'clock, 2.5 hours before he went out and he made his statement, this wonderful statement about, full of lies, that he had arms, and he also said in that original statement, and we want to thank the Pakistani intelligence service for its help on this, but they got rid of that. It's in the draft. He made a mistake. Anyway, and he just read something. I can't say that he knew everything. The mens rea. He knew he was lying. He read what they gave him. They had not cleared that statement. The political people began a fight that night. We can't. We have to double cross Pasha and Kiani, the two guys in charge of the bomb that we put so much time in, and two serious officers, and we had to double cross them. And Gates went nuts, saying, "Are you crazy?" And the option is to say, we screwed up and we didn't see it, and the Americans snuck in. And that's what they ended up doing.
Yeah.
They ended up, and which is a terrible position to be in. If you want to,
Meaning we're total incompetence.
Totally
we can't defend our country against anyone.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. And here's the other thing they did. There were teams in the CIA that were watching couriers, trying to track couriers, because they want to know who, they were looking for bin Laden if they could find a courier. And in the Senate Intelligence, last year a big report came out by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and it was a 6,000-word report. 5,500 pages were deleted for security reasons. But there was a section on following couriers. If you read it carefully, it was all about how you couldn't do it. Because the spelling may be with an E or an A, and we couldn't track it. It was just about how hard it was. And they had cables saying we can't get anywhere. But nonetheless, the courier story is good, because you want to explain how you got him. You have to protect the idea that somebody walked in. And the other reason there was a fight that night about putting out the courier story, saying couriers did it, was because then you could say, the CIA was really adamant about this, then you could say, we got a courier, and under torture, waterboarding, he told the truth about where bin Laden is. That's what they wanted to say. Gates stopped that. Yeah. They didn't say that in that speech, but they began to brief it. So that's how Zero Dark 30, this movie that begins with torture. The idea was, as long as we're going to lie, let's go all the way. Yeah. And there's something in the CIA known as eye-washing. That's what they call it. Eye-washing is when you don't tell other people what's going on in your own agency, because you want the couriers to think they did it. That way they can see the press and be very persuasive. And that's why reporters kept on saying, Hersh can't be right, because I interviewed the couriers. They told me the whole story. He's lost his mind. He's gone crazy. How could he possibly think this? Yes. And about 6 months ago, a New York Times magazine guy, a guy named Mahler, wanted to come and talk to me about all this. And he wrote this very interesting magazine piece in the New York Times saying, whoa, first of all, he found a couple of reporters who worked in Pakistan, one who worked for the New York Times covering Afghanistan for 10 years who had left.
Was that Burns?
No, her name was Carlotta Gall.
Oh, yes.
Carlotta Gall told him that she'd been told he was living there. Yeah. And another journalist told him that. And so he found this, and NBC initially reported there had been a walk-in too, but they got frightened off by the White House. So he wrote a piece that you could only conclude. It wasn't about me. I mean, I was there, and it wasn't a profile. I didn't want to be. Yeah. He concluded there was something to, not only to what I wrote, but there's something to the whole process that's very wrong. And the Washington Bureau of the New York Times went crazy. Here's a magazine piece saying that they're reporting, and so they wrote a letter to the editor, and a very competent reporter wrote a letter. He'd been writing most of the stories after the first week after 9/11. Wrote a letter saying, in 30 years of being in the newspaper, I've never seen anything like this. And here's what their argument basically was. I always think, don't they have a mother that could tell them something, what not to do? The position of the newspaper, when I wrote my story first came out, was the only history that exists and that mattered was the history of the first week after the event, when we were talking to the president and they told us everything. That's the only history. There's no further reclama.
There's no past.
No, there's no future. There's no historian can't. That was their position. That was their. And I was amazed that they would write this in letters that ended up on the internet, because everything leaks. Yeah. It was all over the internet. These very heated letters saying, "How dare the magazine take the side of Hersh on this?" Because then don't they know what we wrote the story the first week, and that's it. It's just amazing.
Sai, it's been great talking to you. We could go on all night and all day tomorrow, but we've got to stop somewhere. Thanks very much. A very real pleasure.